In that year, when the East was music, still wrapped in mist and the smoke of war spread across all of Asia, an empire marched with over 400,000 soldiers, iron, cavalry, longbows, and warships vast, as floating fortresses, driving south, believing one battle would erase a small nation forever. Against them stood only a few tens of thousands thin, tired men, armed music with rusted blades, bamboo, bows, and the will to die for their land. But in their eyes there was no fear, only fire. Then night fell, thunder rolled, music, wind screamed, and the river suddenly blazed like a sun, exploding in music, darkness. Drums thundered across the delta. Tiny war boats, music, burst from the fog, their flames consuming the mighty fleet above the water. When dawn returned, the empire that once made half the world tremble lay in ashes, and from the smoke and fire a small nation rose to right. The legend of the night when the water burned. In the year 1284, dark clouds of war began to roll south from the steppes of Asia. It was the Mongol Empire, the most powerful war machine of the 13th century. In less than 50 years, Mongol armies had conquered nearly all of Eurasia, the southern Song dynasty in what is now China, the Goryeo kingdom on the Korean peninsula, the empires of Persia and Khwarezm, and even the lands along the Volga River in Eastern Europe. Wherever they marched, cities burned, empires fell, and entire nations vanished into ash. No wall could stop them. No army could resist them. After the conquest of the southern Song, Kublai Khan, emperor of the Yuan dynasty, turned his gaze southward. Only one land in the region had refused to kneel, die, Viet to Kublai. This was not just a small kingdom. It was the gateway to Southeast Asia, a path that would open a road to Kampa in modern central Vietnam, Siam, today's Thailand, and even as far as Burma and India. If Dviet fell, the Khan's dream of ruling all Asia would be complete. So in the winter of 1284, he gave a single order: invade Dviet. The plan was massive. From the north, his son, Prince Togan, Thuat would led more than 300,000 soldiers, Mongol cavalry, Chinese infantry, and conscripted vassals, crossing the border into the Red River Plain. From the south, General Toto would march north from Kampa with over 100,000 men. Two enormous forces, two jaws of steel, closing in on one small kingdom. Their objective was clear: to capture Tang, long modern-day Hanoi, to seize the king of Dviet, and to turn the nation into a vassal of the Yuan Empire. Against that tide, Dviet stood small but unbroken. Under King Tran Nanong, the entire army numbered only 60,000 to 70,000 regular soldiers, supported by local militias, river fleets, and peasant fighters from every province. Barely a tenth of the Mongol force. The difference was staggering: 300,000 against 70,000. Music, on paper, the war looked hopeless. But wars are not won by numbers alone. The Mongols were strongest on open plains, where their cavalry and archers could dominate, but they struggled in jungles, swamps, and rivers. Dviet was a land of water and mist, and its people had turned that land into a weapon. At the head of their defense stood Tran Hung Dao, the grand commander and strategist of Daviet. He understood that to face such an empire, he could not fight by strength, only by strategy. His plan was simple but brilliant: withdraw deliberately, trade space for time, lure the invaders deep into unfamiliar terrain, stretch their supply lines, and destroy them piece by piece. Across the country, the preparations began. Villages hid their food. Bridges were dismantled. Crops were flooded. Every river bend, every forest, every swamp would become a trap. The land itself would fight when news of the invasion reached the capital. King Tran Nanong called a great council beside the Benin River. Under the cold torch, light nobles, generals, and soldiers gathered as one. They swore to defend their homeland to the last breath. On their arms they carved two words that would become immortal. Sat that killed the Mongols. That night the river, music, flowed silently toward the north. But within the hearts of the people of Dviet, a storm had already begun to rise. The calm before the storm was deceptive. Across the Viet, the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the land was holding its breath before thunder struck. From the mountains to the coast, orders spread like wildfire. Every province, every village, every family, all knew what must be done. Blacksmiths worked without rest, their forges glowing red through the night. Steel rang like thunder as thousands of spears, swords, and arrowheads were born. Farmers buried their harvest, hiding food and rice deep beneath the earth. Fishermen stripped their nets and turned boats into weapons, strengthening their holds with layers of bamboo and iron spikes. Across the Red River, shipyards came alive. Hundreds of small warships were built, light, fast, and deadly in the narrow waters of the delta. Each boat carried oil jars, fire arrows, and bamboo, shields coated in wet clay. These were not vessels of empire, but the tools of survival crafted by hands that refused to surrender. Tran Hung Dao inspected every stronghold himself, from the citadel of Thong Long to the marshes of the east. He drew a web of defense. Across the country, fortresses were connected by hidden signal fires. Messengers memorized routes through forests and rivers, ready to move news of the enemy faster than any rider. Maps of the rivers were redrawn. Each bend, each tide, each sandbank was marked and measured. The land became a living battlefield, a weapon waiting for its moment to strike. On the plains, recruits trained with sharpened bamboo poles. They learned to move as one, to vanish into the reeds and reappear like ghosts. Commanders drilled their men not to fight for glory, but for survival, for the land beneath their feet, for the families waiting in silence beyond the hills. Temples became command posts. Pagan bells carried coded messages between villages. The monks who prayed by day became couriers by night. Women prepared bandages, cooked for soldiers, and filled jars with oil that would one day burn on the rivers. Every heartbeat of the nation moved to a single rhythm, resistance, and yet, amid the urgency, there was silence. No one spoke of fear, though it hung in the air. Everyone knew what was coming, and everyone understood their music role. When the final plans were drawn, Tran Hung Dao stood before his generals. The maps before him were not just lines of rivers and hills. They were traps. Every current, every field, every forest ready to close upon the invader. He said only one thing: when the storm comes, let break on our terms. The forges cooled, the ships waited, the land was still. But beneath that silence, a nation was ready. Steel in its heart, fire in its soul. The invasion began like thunder. From the north, Prince Togan led his army through the mountain passes, armor gleaming, banners whipping in the wind, dust rising like storm clouds. From the south, General to advance with his fleet, war drums echoing across the horizon. Over 400,000 men, the full strength of the empire, marched to crush a nation they believed had already fallen. But when they entered Dviet, there was nothing. No soldiers, no villagers, only smoke drifting above. Abandoned villages, wells filled in, granaries burned, bridges destroyed. It was not fear, it was strategy. Tron hung. Tao had made his country disappear. Thousands of villages emptied overnight. The invaders found no enemy to fight, only hunger, sickness, and despair. Horses collapsed in the mud. Men starved. In silence. But arrogance blinded them. Believing the Viet was broken, Togan marched toward Tang Long, the royal capital. When his banners reached its gates, no arrows greeted them. The city stood silent, the streets cold and empty. Only ashes and wind remained. For a moment, the conqueror hesitated, but pride drowned out reason. He entered the citadel and declared victory. Trumpets sounded, wine flowed, feast lasted 3 nights and days. The banners of the Yuan fluttered proudly over a dead city. They believed Dai Vitat had fled in terror, but beyond those silent walls, in the forests, in the marshes, along the misty, music, rivers, the real army waited. Tron hung, Tao had not run. He watched. He waited. He knew the empire's greatest. Weakness was not its sword, but its pride. When the feasting ended, the trap began to close. Scouts vanished. Messengers never returned. Fog rolled over the Red River, thick and endless. To the music north, silence. To the south, the drums began. Faint at first, then louder, then unstoppable. And then came the fire. The night of Tet was torn apart by thunder and flame. From the river mist, hundreds of Viet war boats burst forward. Their hulls glistened with oil, their sails painted red, torches blazing on every prow. Music like burning stars charging into the dark. Flaming arrows stray across the sky, raining down on the anchored Yuan. Fleet oil jars shattered. Within moments, the calm river became a sea of fire. Reflections of flame danced on. Iron armor and terrified eyes. The Yuan fleet panicked. Their massive warships turned too slowly. Hidden stakes ripped through their holes. One after another, the ships cracked, tilted, and burned. Sailors screamed and leapt into the water. Music, but the river was on fire. The water itself devoured them. From both banks, thousands of deviate. Soldiers charged. War horns blared. Drums thundered. The cry rose like a storm. Across the delta, Satat killed the invaders. Spearmen advanced in tight formations. Archers behind them loosing volley after volley. Flaming arrows fell like rain, turning the night into a storm of red. Light in the center of the chaos. Small, Dai Viet boats darted between the great. UN ships striking, ramming, vanishing. Into the smoke. The clash of metal echoed like the beating of the earth itself. Sparks flew as steel met music. Steel and the river boiled with fire and blood. Toda tried to restore order. He shouted commands through the roar of battle, but no one could hear. Signals were lost in smoke. Ships collided. A store of oil ignited. A pillar of flame tore into the sky. Its glow, music, reaching even the towers of Tang. Long, far away, the victorious army. Inside the city, music looked out to see the horizon burning. There, celebration turned to dread. The river, the empire's lifeline, was on fire. Then, Tron Hung Dao gave the order. The drums, music of Tang Long answered. Infantry surged from the reeds. Cavalry thundered. Down from the north, archers fired from the hills. From every side, the land itself attacked. The once mighty UN. Formation music broke apart. Ships burned. Men drowned. Banners fell into the flames. The empire that had crushed kingdoms from Persia to Korea was now drowning on a single Vietnamese river. The wind howled. The fire spread. Charged ships drifted downstream like blackened beasts. The sound of battle became a roar of victory. That night, water and fire became one. And when dawn finally came, only smoke and ashes remained, and the banners of Dwight, torn and scorched, still flying above the river of fire. The Battle of Teat had begun, and for the Empire it was the beginning of the end. The river still burned when the storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the delta. Rain began to fall, heavy, cold, relentless, hissing against the dying flames. Beneath the smoke, what remained of the one army tried to flee. Ships half sunk and soldiers scattered through flooded fields. The empire that once commanded continents was now a broken mass of men stumbling through mud. But Dva did not stop. Tronhunga ordered the pursuit. Drums echoed through the rain. War horns cut through the thunder from the riverbanks. Fresh troops surge forward, infantry in the shallows, cavalry galloping along the dikes. The smell of wet earth and blood heavy in the air. To the north lay Van Keep, the last stronghold of the invaders. Tagen gathered what remained of his forces. Exhausted men, sick horses, shattered morale. He built fortifications of mud and bamboo, hoping to hold until reinforcements arrived, but none would come. The empire was too far away. No sound answered his calls for aid, only the beating of the rain. As dawn broke, the mist lifted to reveal the final battlefield. Van Keep stood like an island in a sea of watering corpses. Across the flooded plain, the banners of Dwight rose from the fog. Hundreds of them, red, gold, and unstoppable. When the order came, the attack was merciless. Catapults hurled flaming stones into the camp. Drums roared from every direction. Arrows fell in black waves. The rain turned to steam as it struck the fire. The sound was endless. Steel on steel, water on flame. The cries of men who realized too late that they were already dead. Tron hung Dow's forces closing from three sides. The river behind the fortress boiled with wreckage. To the east, the cavalry charged through the rising water, hooves sending up sprays of red and rain. To the west, infantry breached the palisades. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Towin tried to rally his troops, but his words drowned beneath the thunder and screams. A stray arrow struck his banner. The great flag of the empire fell into the mud, the symbol of conquest gone in an instant. By nightfall, the fortress of Von Keep was gone. Flames rose through the storm. Those who survived threw down their weapons and fled north, hunted through the forest by local militias and peasants who struck from shadows with spears and fire. Todu was dead. Tagen fled disguised in darkness, abandoning his soldiers to the flood. Of the 400,000 who had entered Dai Viet, barely a fraction escaped. The rest were claimed by the land, by the rivers, by the fire, by the storm. When the rain finally ceased, the red river flowed quietly again. Its banks were black with ash and armor. The smoke of victory rose to the clouds. On a hill overlooking the plain, Tron Hung Dao watched in silence. There was no triumph in his face, only calm, for he knew the truth of victory, that freedom always carries a price, and that peace is never given, only earned. Across the land, bells rang from temples. Farmers returned to their villages. The people music wept, not in grief, but in pride, for they had seen what no empire believed possible. A small nation that refused to kneel, and a river that could devour an army. But its echo, the cry of a people who stood together, would thunder through history forever. When the thunder faded, silence returned to the land. The rain washed the ashes. From the fields, broken helmets lay, beside burned ships and the rivers. Music, once red with blood, now flowed clear. Again, villagers began to return. They came out from the forests and mountains, carrying their children and rebuilding their homes with trembling hands. Temples rang their bells at dawn there, echoes spreading music over a quiet land reborn. The Viet was wounded but alive. King Tran Nan Tong rode through the ruins of Tang Long, where the enemy had once feasted. Farmers now cleared the rubble. On the city walls, banners of red and gold flew again, no longer symbols of survival, but of pride. Across Asia, news of the defeat spread like wildfire. The empire that had conquered from Persia to Russia, music had been crushed by a land no larger than one of its provinces. Foreign envoys and merchants rode in disbelief. A single river destroyed an entire army. A small music nation stood its ground until the invaders fell. But within Viet, there was no arrogance, only quiet. Rebuilding, the sound of hammers, striking iron, the chant of monks, echoing from temple halls, the laughter of children playing in villages reborn from ashes. Freedom was not celebrated with pride, but protected with gratitude. Tron Hunger refused gold, land, and titles. He asked for only one thing, unity, that the people never forget what had been won and how much had been sacrificed to win it. His music words echoed through generations. True strength lies not in conquest, but in the will to defend one's home. Years passed and storms came again, but whenever danger returned, the people of Viet would whisper the same vow. Remember the river, remember the fire, because on that river a small nation had faced the greatest empire on earth. And music proved that even against the storm, a united people can never be conquered. Centuries have passed, but the river, music, still flows, calm, endless, and silent. No trace remains of the invader ships, no banners of conquest, no echoes of drums. Only the wind moves over the water where the empire once burned. Yet every ripple still carries a memory. Every gust of music, wind whispers a name, the name of those who stood when all hope was gone. In the temples of Diet, incense drifts upward for the fallen. On village altars, people still bow before the portrait of Tron Hum. Tao, music, the general who turned rivers into fortresses, in unity into a weapon mightier than steel. His legacy is not carved music in stone, but in the hearts of his people. In every generation that remembers that freedom is never given, only defended. From that victory, music, a nation was reborn. It learned that courage can outlast fear, that the will of a small people can humble empires. The world took music notice, not of land size, but of its spirit. Today, as the river flows through peaceful fields, its waters shimmer beneath the same music sun that once shone on the flames of battle. And those centuries have passed. Music, the story of that day still burns, a flame carried by the descendants' music of heroes, a reminder whispered to every generation. Empires rise and fall, but those who fight for their home will live forever.